March 5th, Whitetail Coach segment. We are going to talk today about the understanding the mature whitetail buck and how that relates to the success and habitat creations and the future of this management game that we play with trying to get on more mature deer. The outlook that I have on this is kind of like a coach has going into March Madness, whether that's on a high school platform, whether that's on a college platform. A coach's responsibility is not to just sit in the locker room and talk one-on-one or in a group setting with their team and focus on the good things that they did throughout the entire season. The goal is, the best coaches do is they reach out and grab all of the success that they've had and all the failure that they've had through the season and highlight those and push the team to excel to the next step and explain to them why, make them understand what the game that they're playing in, whether that's a district championship, whether that's a regional championship, whether you make it to the state level, or whether it's that Sweet 16 or making it to the Final Four in college. They have to understand as players what the meaning is to the game that they're playing, not the game that they're playing as far as the game of basketball in general, but what the meaning of the game that they're playing in a district final game or a regional final game or making it to the Final Four. That is the avenue that excels teams over subpar teams and gets them to that high success rate, is when you highlight that and you really make someone understand what the goal is and why are they there, what game are they playing, how they got there, what they need to do better, and what tools they need to excel. So today's topic is really digging in deep and really understanding the mature whitetail buck and how that plays into our habitat, our hunting strategies, and our focus and our goals moving forward on these properties. The first thing that we're going to touch on is what and why hunters harvest immature deer. What gets that platform to cap off at mature deer, why they're there depending on the area, whether it's here in Michigan or whether it's in Wisconsin, Minnesota, or whether it's at these sought-after states of Kansas, Iowa, Missouri, Illinois, these big name states, Pike County, Illinois. What creates a platform? What stops people from going the extra mile to taking their hunting success to the next level? I believe, my personal opinion is on that, is the focus on horn growth, horn size, points, APRs, antler point restrictions. This all plays into my outtake on why the age structure and understanding the mature whitetail buck has a platform is capped. My outtake is on it is, for years the industry was pushing quality deer management. For example, the association was trying to push age. You've all seen the billboards, you all understand the mission. It's let them go, let them grow. For years that's what we promoted, and that's what we tied onto and what we tried to teach and preach, if you will, and educate the future coming up as our hunters and how to get them there through habitat improvements and all that conjoined. The problem with that is, over the years, what you've seen these, whether it's as simple as picking a shed up or whether it's as simple as when in a hunting situation, going in and looking for inches. It's all about inches. It's all about putting a tape on something, and it's all 140, 150. Let's start smaller. Pope and Young, 130, 140, 150. Hence the reason parts of Illinois, such as Pike County, Illinois, up until the last couple of years where things are starting to change, that is the reason that Pike County, Illinois, in general, is the 130-inch capital of the world. It reaches those platforms when you start discussing and focusing on inches. Now, it's not a bad thing to try to outdo the buck that you shot last year, or outdo a neighbor or outdo a buddy. That it all plays into how the passion and the success of hunting is driven. The problem with that is what we've got away from for years is the fact of promoting age and how age structure, understanding a mature buck, age structure in general, focuses your attention and educates you as far as a hunter. That's the problem with the focus on inches that is taken from the focus on age, in my opinion. That is what has switched the momentum in this industry to inches and not age. So my goal is, starting in this video, and we're gonna elaborate this on certain or additional videos as it goes forward. But today's topic, we're gonna start on a platform of understanding the mature buck, understanding where they came from and where they are now in a overall spectrum of how they got there and how we fit into that as hunters. The number one topic that we're going to talk about is an immature buck. A fawn is that 3 to 4 month old deer, 6-month-old deer when you're in that hunting season, and depending on what part of the country that you're in. And those deer, up until they're a year and a half, until they're 2.5 years old, are reliant on their motherly instincts to get them past that year and a half, 2.5-year-old platform. And that is what creates these deer that feel comfortable going out into field settings, big open ag settings, whether that's in a high pressure state or a non-high pressure state. You'll see a lot of these immature deer movement is focused on mature deer, mature does, let's say, coming into a food plot and blowing and alerting the other deer. And because those fawns will stick with those mothers for a year or two, or depending on your deer density, that all changes. So the immature buck has noticeable tactics that you can pick out when you are afield, when you're hunting in a stand. These deer follow the leader. These deer are more apt, you're more apt to see them early season in bachelor groups, large number of bachelor groups in especially a high pressured state. It seems like in my findings and in my my experiences have in the high pressured states, you'll see smaller numbers of mature bucks in bachelor groups in the summertime. Is because this all plays into the age structure and how they find their place, where in what herd, in what region, and how they fit into that. To an immature deer, nutrition is key, food is key, and the other spectrums of an age structure fall behind that. They're worried about whether it's fawns before they start the age of maturity. They start relying on food, whether it's mother's milk, then they switch to greens, and then they go from there into hay fields. They go into ag settings, and they're not thinking about being nocturnal. They're not following the guidelines of a mature buck. That's what plays into these immature deer getting harvested, and that is the hurdle that we need to educate, and we need to be able to get hunters in the states that aren't there as far as management platforms. That is something that we need to take into consideration, making people understand what they're actually hunting and why they're seeing a year-and-a-half-old, 2.5-year-old deer more relatively than they're seeing mature bucks. And I think that people just especially in areas where you're dealing with way different numbers when you're talking about Kansas versus Iowa, versus Michigan versus Illinois. It's totally different platforms all over the country, and we need to use those. We need to educate ourselves with those states as far as the backing that they have had to get them to that point, and not so much on the tactics that the hunters use when they're in the stands and what they're seeing and how they go about hunting those mature bucks. That's the focus. That's the attention that's right now that is driven in this industry to watch the big name hunters. And I know a lot of them on a personal level, and they all have great shows on the Outdoor Channel, but that's their world. That's the area that they're in that helps them promote that success. And what we're going to talk about is how taking those tips and strategies in the right context will actually teach you more than doing a follow the leader segment or follow the leader year after year on as far as hunting food plots and hanging on food plots and following the leaders in this industry down a road that is not teaching the correct way to hunt high pressure deer. And the folks they don't, unless you see both sides of the spectrum, you won't be able to connect yourself with why are the people in Illinois and Iowa and Kansas able to do what they're doing and harvest the deer that they're doing, and I can't do that here in Michigan, and I'm doing exactly what they tell me to do, and I'm using their same blinds, and I'm on these food plots the same as they are, and it's just not working, and I don't I don't know why this connection isn't doing, and it turns into and unless you understand this platform that we're talking about, it turns into a frustration. And when you're frustrated as a deer hunter, the quality of your management, the quality of your success, everything goes down the tube. And that's what we are here. I'm here as a whitetail coach to push people over that level, to make them understand that they're not playing on the same platforms. It's a high school basketball game versus a college Final Four team. It's two separate platforms. It's not that you can't be there, as that you can't take those kids from high school and get to the Final Four someday, but you have to be realistic about where you're at and how what you have to work with and the area that you're in, and educate yourself on the tools that they're using to put yourself in that Final Four at the end of the season. That's the determination that you have to be honest. You have to be willing to understand, and that's where understanding mature whitetail deer comes into this. As a buck goes from that immature stage that we just talked about, the things that you can see that gives away an immature buck, the area that they're in, how they show themselves during the certain parts of the season. What when you see a mature buck, what entails a mature buck's thought train? These are some of the things that come to mind. A mature buck starts to find his pecking order, if you will, or his place in a herd at the age of 3.5. He starts to understand what his role is as a buck, period. As he starts to understand where that role affects the herd, how it affects the herd, which other deer are there, if there's other mature deer in that area, or if he's in an area where 3.5 is the mature deer, and how he fits in and where he needs to place himself to be not so much a go-getter on as far as food plots and daylight movement. He starts to understand, because of pressure, especially in high-pressured states, he starts to understand how he has to make a living to be able to stay alive and get through the hunting seasons. This all comes into effect, starts taking place at the age of 3.5. His mindset totally changes within a year's time of going down the road of thinking, why don't I enter these food plots? Which side of these food plots should I enter? How do I transition from a bedding area to a feed location? What properties do I need to stay off from? And if you're not willing to understand and give the mature whitetail deer that respect, you'll never understand this age platform, and it won't make sense to you, and you'll struggle with this the entire time. You have to be able to put yourself in this realm of understanding mature deer. Then you can start accepting, when we start comparing them to humans, the age structure and how that all fits and how they interact and how they move and how they don't want to be involved in drama. This is when this from 2.5 to 3.5 years old starts playing into effect, and it starts really making sense for hunters when you're trying to design properties and you're trying to hang stand placements. You start understanding why. Why did this change from 2.5 to 3.5? Why did this deer go from, I'm seeing him in the summer, but he's not on my properties in the fall? Why did I see him last year at 2.5 on my properties and now he's not? This all starts connecting. But if you're going into this with a closed mind and you're focused, that's the reason that we just spoke about before. That's what caps hunters at 2.5 years old. That plays into it. They're not willing to open their mind. They're not willing to take leadership. They're not willing to take advice, to go to the next step, to find out what it's like to get to a 3.5-year-old deer and understand them. If you're not willing to understand them, it's a respect thing. Going back to the basketball mentality, it's like going into a district final game and not respecting your opponent. If you go into that game and you do not respect your opponent, you go into a Final Four game and you don't respect, that's supposed to be a blowout, and you don't respect what they have to offer, you have capped yourself at your capability. And that is exactly, in the whitetail world, understanding the mature deer. That's why hunters cap themselves at 2.5 years old, is because they don't understand, and a lot of times they're not willing to understand what happens when a deer transitions from 2.5 to 3.5 years old. We're going to talk about something here in a minute on the whiteboard that will bring this into full spectrum for you, and that's something that I learned years ago and that I teach, and I'm going to teach it to you today. But this is the mindset that you have to get yourself in and willing to go down this road, this avenue. One of the things I like to to connect with people as we're talking about these mature deer going into this early stages of maturity. You know, I always reference this to people, and since we're on the basketball topic, I always ask them. I said, you know, if you're a sports person, if you were or if you weren't, I always ask folks when teaching these or doing seminars or talking to guys on the phone about how to take their properties, or on the properties, let's say, how to get those properties to the next level. And I always ask them is you have to understand, like we just said, you have to understand the chart, you have to understand the platform of what you're dealing with. And I always ask them, it's as simple as this. If you played sports in high school, do you today, as you're 38 or 40 or 45 years old, do you still hang out with your freshman basketball team? All the guys that were on your freshman basketball team, all the people that were involved in that, do you still relate with them today? Do you still hang out with them? Do you still go to the bars? Are you and your wife and their wives connected? The majority of the answer is no. Is because the older that we get is the same connection with a mature whitetail buck. We like the serenity. We like to put ourselves away. We like to, our families go one way, their families go another. Doesn't mean that we don't connect when we see each other, but it's a separation, and that's exactly what happens. That's a good way to explain it when you're talking about whitetail and the maturity of a whitetail deer. Is these mature bucks start wanting to find this area that they can involve themselves in the game, if you will, when needed, but when they don't need to, they will take themselves out of it. There's no number that takes. I get asked sometimes, you know, what's the number of acres that I need to make a mature buck feel comfortable? And there's no one set answer. And the reason that is a correctly handled 5 acres in the state of Michigan can be just as good or better than 120 acres in the state of Iowa if handled correctly, and that mature buck knows that he is safe and he's in charge, and he's able to reach out when he wants to reach out and navigate through certain areas of property to get to certain things that he needs. That is what makes a small parcel. That is where you find the power in a small parcel, I should say, as treating that way and respecting that 5 acres. The problem that you run into is the guys that own, you know, these larger parcels. We always talk about small parcels, but the guys that own the larger parcels, where you start getting 80s, 120s, 240s, you start dealing with 400 acres down in the Midwest. I see a lot of times is people don't respect the mature age structure of a mature whitetail buck, and it gets them into trouble. Just because you have more property doesn't mean that that gives you free reins to invade and interrupt the cycle or the maturity, not respect the maturity level of a whitetail buck. And that is what gets people into trouble. I'd rather help guys that are on a small spectrum, on a small parcel, and make them understand how to treat these small parcels. And then when you're able to hunt large parcels, you take the same things that you've learned on small parcels and you implement those on large parcels. That's when you start feeling the power of knowing how to hunt these mature whitetail bucks and being very successful in doing so. As these mature bucks reach 3.5, 4.5, start creeping up at 5.5 years old, another good reference is it's very simple to folks when you put it in sometimes we connect this, like I said, to the human side of it, our side of it. You know, you go from a high school level where you want to be in the drama, and you want to be involved with the day-to-day sports, and you want to be in all the activities and extracurricular activities that go on after school. And mature buck starts to change just like we start to change when you hit that college level, and you're still involved. You're growing out of that phase where you start seeing that the bar life isn't as important as college, and it's not as important as a trade school or learning that knowledge and taking that knowledge to the next step. Your your thought process starts changing, and you start gaining ground when you start to understand how that ties in and why that they start separating themselves from the college bar scene, if you will, and takes themselves out of that and implements that on a social aspect when they want to be social, but being in an area where they're away from that drama. And that's where these the habitat improvements start coming into play. understanding how that fits into buck bedding versus doe bedding, and why that we create buck bedding areas, and how we can determine what is a buck bedding area when you're scouting, you're doing postseason scouting. These are the things that when you start relating this, and when you have an open mindset to understand this and see these things on a landscape, that you'll start understanding, okay, this buck went from 2.5, he was involved in all this, then he separated himself, he started, disappearing on trail cameras, he started getting a little more catty. I had to start implementing some more things, and when I started implementing the same routine that I was doing hunting him at 2.5 years old, and the same deer that I killed last year at 2.5 years old, then I wasn't successful. This is where people start understanding, when they see this, on how the deer, maturity level hits their world. When you see this, we're going to put this on the board behind me right now. When you see this chart, when you see this laid out on a wall behind you, you will start to understand it clicks. So everyone has, there's some differences in the world out there. Everybody has their own opinion about what a whitetail age spectrum means versus a human side of the chart. If we're a year old, we're a year old. If you take in the dog life cycle, if you will, everybody knows it's a 7-year time period. Now, if you look a time difference, if you look into some research that is done, you'll find that this goes anywhere from, I found that this goes from anywhere from a year or 7 years, so 1 year equals 7, and that goes all the way up to like 8 or 9. I've seen that depending on the region that you're in. Obviously, deer in the north don't live as long as deer in the south. Stuff like that plays into this, but we are going to use the 7-year time period just as like a dog's life cycle, an animal's life cycle, because if the charts that I like are the ones that compare the age structure of a 10-year-old dog versus you start getting a whitetail buck that's in these levels of 7.5, 8.5, 9.5 years old. That's the high spectrum. I mean, there is cases out there that these deer have lived, especially does. They're finding does now. Just last year, there was a doe killed in Mecosta County, Michigan, that was 13.5 years old. That happens in the UP all the time when they're able to transfer into these migration areas, if you will, these deer yards, and they start harvesting these deer that are mature. So what we're going to use today, without getting any more lengthy here, what we're going to use today is a 1=7 age spectrum, so you can really get the feel on how this works. I'm going to lay this out on the table and on the chart behind me, and the reason that I'm going to do this is because once you see this, we're going to lay this out, you can start understanding how a immature deer goes to a mature deer very quickly, and how you have to be willing to, your property has to be set up right to take in this advanced, ramped up age structure, age cycle, and how it has to happen quick, and understanding it will make you a more successful mature deer hunter. So using that platform, what we're going to do is a 1.5-year-old buck equals 7. So the first time that you see a horns, or you start recognizing a whitetail buck as which buck he is, you start seeing those spikes, those 4, those 6 points, small 8s, depending on where you're at in the country. A year and a half old, that deer is already advanced to 7 years old in our world, in our human world. He's 7 years old from the time that you see him. Number 2, 2.5, he's 14. So now you start hunting a teenager. Now you've went from pushing around and being able to get away with things that you wouldn't be able to get away with as in a childhood situation. If everybody has kids that you're raising, you know that when they go to advance to the teenager life, they know everything. I was there, you were there. Now we have kids that are there, and you have to be willing to acknowledge their change. But in a deer's world, that's how fast it changes. 1 year, they're 7 years ahead of you. That quick. You think your kids age fast? Put yourself in the whitetail world. This is what happens. So now it went from 2. Now he's set. The first year he was 7. Second year he's 14. Third year comes into play. Now you're hunting a 21-year-old. Now you got 21 years equal advanced experience on a deer. 21 years old at that 3. So now your game has to start stepping up at that point. You have to start acknowledging that age advancement. You have to understand the rules of the game. You have to put yourself in this. You have to give him credit. If you're not giving him credit at 3.5 years old, the game's over. This is a platform. This is how these things create a top shelf atmosphere, if you will, that doesn't allow a lot of hunters to get past this age structure, is because of that right there. At the age of 3, you're dealing with 21 years of an advanced experience. Now, is the deer alive for 21 years? No, he's not. But this is how using a 7-year advanced age step makes you a believer real quick. So we're going to advance this. 4.5. You jump from 4.5. Now this deer is 28 years old. 5.5. You're at 35. 6. You're at 42. 7. 49 years old. So I hope that it has as much power with you as it has with me. Let that sink in. 1 is 7, 14, 21, 28, 35, 42, 49 years old at peak maturity. You're dealing with a 49-year-old adult man that you're trying to beat. This is why I push to understand, have people understand, and teach people to understand the power of understanding a mature whitetail deer. That right there. Like I said before, if you don't feel that, if that doesn't give you goosebumps when you see that on the wall, you should be able to take this to the next level. You have to let this sink in. Now, how understanding this, how does this play into a hunting situation, and understanding how important it is and acknowledging this advancement, how this plays into a hunting situation. And it all revolves around respect. If you are willing to respect this deer age structure, you are in the driver's seat as far as trying to figure out a mature buck. So now, knowing this, I'm going to ask you a few things here. I'm going to ask you to do a few things. I'm going to ask you to put this thought process in your head moving forward here. When the next time that you watch the Outdoor Channel, I'm going to name some names here, is because I respect them highly. The next time that you watch the Outdoor Channel or the Sportsman's Channel, and you see these guys that are Mark and Terry Drury, Lee and Tiffany Lakowski, these names that are in this industry that have set the bar high, that are doing things great, you have to understand the playing field that they're on, how they got there, where they came from, what they were, how they're developing their farms, the area that they're developing their farms in, how they're able to hunt their farms. The problem with that is this is why I'm implementing this, and for years I've been working with this on clientele, is because watching those videos and not understanding the trouble that you can get yourself into by taking that advice and implementing that on small parcels in the state of Michigan will get you into serious trouble. So in other words, you need to take their advice on food plots, you need to take their advice on where to plant these food plots, but you have to understand you cannot hunt these farms in the state of Michigan, in the state of Wisconsin, the state of Minnesota, like you can hunt these farms in Iowa, Illinois, and Kansas. It's a destruction upon destruction path that you do not want to put yourself on. Not saying that you shouldn't take their advice and you shouldn't watch their show and you shouldn't promote them, because I know I do. I know both of them situations. I know both of them families on a personal level, and they're great. They have set the bar high on the industry. I love watching them. I watch their stuff, but I know where they're at and what they're doing. So here's the game that I want you to play. Here is the advice that I want you to take to the bank and use this as a tool to promote yourself from a whitetail coach. Implement this on your high pressure areas, your areas such as Michigan, like we talk, Michigan, Indiana, parts of Indiana, Wisconsin, Minnesota. I want you to take this advice and roll this into this 2020 hunting season that we have, and see if it doesn't change your success. So what I want you to do is I want you to, like I said, I want you to take those, I want you to continue to watch the Outdoor Channel, but I want you to watch these things that these folks are doing. I want you to be able to take these and take their advice and implement that correctly. What I want you to do is I want you to take my advice on how to set your farm up and hunt these farms as far as in a high pressured situation. And here's why, is because if you ever get the opportunity to see how setting these farms up and how powerful it is to create side access on a small parcel in the state of Michigan, or to not hunt a food plot in the state of Wisconsin, or go to some parts of Illinois, or I'll use Indiana too, and use these farms, how to hunt switchgrass, how to make switchgrass pockets, how to not overhunt these properties, where to correctly hang a tree stand. Once you understand the meaning and why you're doing this against an age structure that advances this quickly, then what you're going to see is you're going to be able to, if you're ever blessed enough, like I have been in the past, to take this, whether it's on a guiding adventure or whether it's on a personal hunting adventure where you're heading out to Iowa or Kansas in pursuit of a trophy mature buck, maybe a once in a lifetime buck for a lot of guys. You're able to take these tips that you've learned and these strategies that you've learned off these small parcels hunting high pressure states, and you're able to take that advice with you out to the Midwest in these sought after states, and your success rate will go through the roof. If you play this on the other side of things, and you continue to watch these tips that are given on these big shows, and you continue to implement these hunting on the edge of these food plots, and you continue to walk across food plots on your way in, and you continue to use corn as screening, and you continue to use this, you are capping yourself. You're going to get frustrated. Your mature deer in the state of Michigan, in most areas, not southern Michigan, but mid Michigan, northern Michigan, there's a reason that a 3.5-year-old deer is the mature deer of the neighborhood. This is exactly why. If you take a mentality of hunting a 2.5-year-old or 3.5-year-old deer mentality, and you take that into the Midwest, and you get down there and you go with an outfitter or whatever the case may be, they're going to implement you on their world of hunting. So you're probably gonna, especially with an outfitter, if they know the area, you're gonna have a higher success rate. Or if you're on a farm that's been leased or whatever the case is, you got some direction. But what I'm saying is, if you can take the power of learning this the hard way, if you will, graduating from the University of Hard Knocks, if you will, and take this with you when you adventure out onto new leased properties, before you leased properties, before you go down the road of spending your hard-earned money and blowing it on a farm, and because it's not the bad farm, it's because of the way that you're hunting it, and not respecting the advanced age structure here behind me and how fast that gets out of control. This is how this all ties together. Now that we've talked about the age structure here and understanding a mature whitetail deer, and how on a hunting platform and a habitat improvement platform that ties into it, and why are you creating what you're creating, is to battle against this right here. This is what you're battling. You're not battling against this anymore. Going into 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. You're going into 7, 14, 21, 28, 35, 42, 49. Them are the numbers that you need to be focused on. That's the respect level that you need to step up your game to be able to get you to the next step, whether that's here in the state of Michigan or whether that's going to Kansas and being successful on a mature whitetail buck.